This is Press Pass, your all-access pass to an extra Meet the Press conversation. This week on Press Pass, stories of those who have fought in this century's wars. What did they face? How did they overcome the challenges of war? Mark Lee Greenblatt details this in his new book, Valor, Unsung Heroes from Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Home Front. Mark joins me now. Welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
You know, I'm thinking about that iconic book, The Things They Carried, about our soldiers in Vietnam. A work of fiction, but of course all too real in terms of the sketches, and he had written so many things that were nonfiction as well about the war. Here it seems there's something similar, which is you wanted to shine a light on those soldiers who were coming back who were not getting much attention. Tell me about what led you to this.
Yeah. In 2007, 2008, I went to these awards banquets where they honored military heroes, and these were incredible stories. I mean, hundreds of people in the audience and not a dry eye in the house. And I remember thinking to myself, how come no one knows these men and women? You know, when they go home, there's no ticker tape parade. They aren't household names. They're lucky to be bagging groceries if they find a job in the first place. And I said, we got to know these stories. We have to tell these stories, and no one's telling them. And so I said,
when you say tell these stories, one of the things that I experience is that there's such great regard for our veterans now. We stand up for them at ball games here in town, but around the country. And yet there's not the kind of emotional connection to what they went through. It's not negative, it's certainly more positive, but there's still not the sort of connection to an all-volunteer force the way we think about, say, in Vietnam.
That's right. I think if people intellectually understand what the troops are going through and what they're dealing with, but I wanted to give them a granular experience, a minute-to-minute, heartbeat to heartbeat type of feel to what they're going through. If you think about folks that you could name, I would say that the average American probably couldn't name a soldier or a Marine or a sailor or airman, for a good reason. They can name some of those involved in the controversies, but I don't know that they can name someone for a good reason, and that's the gap I was hoping to fill.
So you chose 9 stories out of all the stories you heard. What made you focus on these 9?
Each of these men, and they're all men, although I tried to get women, but each of the heroes in Valor had some moment of relative safety amidst the maelstrom going on around them. And they consciously decided to put themselves in harm's way, to seek out greater danger, to accomplish a mission or to save a life. And that moment fascinated me. Mm-hmm. And I just had to focus in on what was going on in your mind at that time when you jumped into a sniper's fire to help a buddy, or you carried a man through enemy fire to help save his life, that sort of thing. What was going on in their minds, what drove them to make that decision was just captivating to me. And that moment is what I had to explore.
Share what you learned. Tell me about one of those who you profiled and what led them to that moment.
Absolutely. Well, one of them is an Army pilot, helicopter pilot named Ryan Welch. And Ryan was flying a relatively routine mission over the Triangle of Death in Baghdad. And he got a distress call that there were 2 pilots who were downed in the Triangle of Death. And Ryan and his co-pilot landed their plane in the middle of the Triangle of Death in the middle of night.
We're talking about Anbar Province?
That's right. And they went out, and Ryan got out of his helicopter and ran across this field, located the pilots, and dragged them back because of their injuries, and dragged them back to the helicopter. The problem is they're in Apache. That was the helicopter. That's like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. There's not an inch of extra space. And so he has 2 extra pilots. What's he going to do with them? Well, Ryan put the more injured of the 2 in his seat, and then he strapped himself and the other pilot to the outside of the helicopter as his co-pilot took off and flew them to the hospital. That moment, strapping myself to the outside of the helicopter would never have occurred to me. But, these guys are different. And so that was one thing that just captivated me. That moment where he decides to do that is just so inspiring to me that I had to learn more.
And what did you learn about what propels a soldier in that situation of great stress and danger?
There was one thing that drove all of them and was really overpowering to me, and that was brotherhood, teamwork, self-sacrifice, that concept. It was overwhelming. They all were just driven by taking care of the buddies, the guys next to them. And in a couple of stories, like Ryan's, he didn't really even know the guys. He just knew they were fellow Americans, in uniform, and they needed help. And that was just overwhelming. There was just no thought that, they wouldn't do it. Even though it was going to put themselves in grave danger, They just had to do it.
Talk a little bit about what these 9, and among the others that you talked to, have experienced about coming home.
Sure. Some of them had some difficulty. There's no question about that. They dealt with some demons. And I'm happy to say that the ones who are with us today, 2 have passed, but the 7 of the 9 who are with us today are doing quite well. They have jobs. One of them just became a police officer. Another one left the Navy and he's an instructor now. I mean, they're doing well. But they did have struggles when they came back. They had struggles with the VA, that caused some deep, difficult financial struggles. But I'm happy to report that these guys are doing well and are contributing to society in just a different way.
I want to ask you about the Veterans Administration scandal in just a minute. We'll take a break here, come back with more from Mark Lee Greenblatt and his book, Valor, right after this. Welcome back to Press Pass. We're joined by Mark Lee Greenblatt, author of Valor, Unsung Heroes from Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Home Front. You wrote about Commander Michael Waltz, who worked for the Bush White House after his deployment. What did he describe about how the polarizing nature of the wars in Afghanistan, and particularly in Iraq?
He is deeply committed, particularly in the Afghan arena. That's where he's deployed a couple of times there, and he really, as a policy, on the policy side of the house, he was very involved. I think he's deeply committed to that, and I think he's quite frustrated at the polarization of the war and of the conflict, and I think that is incredibly frustrating to him.
Does he think, and do others think about the future of care? I mean, this is such a huge issue, which is how do we care for a generation of soldiers who may have survived injuries that would have killed previous generations of soldiers, and who have both physical wounds, psychological wounds that need tending to, and our VA system doesn't seem to be up to the task.
Absolutely. 2 of the guys, Dan Foster and James Hassel, both of them ran into difficulties with the VA, the very same types of difficulties that we're seeing, coming to light now. One of them, Dan Foster, he lives in California, but the VA thought he was in North Carolina, and so he didn't get any benefits when he came out for a long time, and he was in deep financial straits as a result. And this is preposterous. I mean, this is an individual who served our country in both Iraq and Afghanistan, earned a Silver Star for some unbelievable conduct in an ambush in a remote outpost in Afghanistan. He comes home, and our VA, can't get its act together, and he was almost homeless. They almost foreclosed on his house because he, couldn't pay off the loan payments. It's just infuriating. And same thing with James Hassel. James Hassel was actually homeless for a little while. He's a Marine who did an incredible thing in Najaf, Iraq, and he comes home and he's struggling because the VA, because of problems with the VA. So it's infuriating, and that's one thing I've heard consistently from the men, is that it's infuriating that the VA is not taking better care.
Is there a sense that they are too invisible in the country? For all of the adulation of the military in general, do they feel invisible to too many Americans?
I think there's a detachment from the folks that serve and the folks that don't, and that is, there's a chasm between those two, and I think that's driving a lot of the problems, because I think it's not in the face of a large swath of our community. We aren't dealing with folks who are going through the VA system. It's not, it doesn't affect our daily lives, and so I think that's part of the problem, is that it's not like in years past, in World War I, World War II, where everyone, there were folks, your neighbors, your family members, someone you knew was serving somewhere. We don't have that now, and I think that causes some of that detachment that you're alluding to.
I'm curious. I've asked General David Petraeus on an occasion whether part of this detachment issue could be solved by reinstituting the draft, and he described the mindset of the professional soldier of 2014 as being very much against the idea of the draft. That this is a caliber of soldier today that is far better trained and educated in matters of military strategy and tactics than in previous generations, and that they've really moved beyond the idea of conscription.
Yeah, I think my sense is from the guys is they were all in this together, like they all joined, and that was infused some of the camaraderie, some of the brotherhood, some of the teamwork is based in the fact that they all chose to go into this service branch. They chose to do that, and I think that drove some of the camaraderie, and so I think that might erode that to some degree if there were a draft.
Is there a lesson that you think this generation of warrior that will potentially, if they stay in the military, be the next generation of leader in the military, that they take from these conflicts of this century?
Sure. Well, I think just from all of their experiences, what I've heard is that dedication to a higher mission is just overwhelming. That they were there and they understood that they were a piece of a bigger puzzle.
But that's true over the sweep of history.
Sure.
Do they learn or take away something specific from these conflicts?
Well, I think part of it is what I've heard from a number of the guys is developing relationships with the communities that they're in. Developing relationships with the citizens of Afghanistan, with the citizens of Iraq, and that's fundamental to long-term success. So I think that was a big part of that. A number of them expressed interest. They loved going out and mingling with the people because they understood that was going to help in the long term, and that was something I think maybe different from previous generations.
The book is Valor, Unsung Heroes from Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Home Front. Mark Lee Greenblatt, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here.